Welcome to the Cold Case Christianity broadcast, the only Christian case-making program hosted by a cold case homicide detective. J. Warner Wallace has been investigating cold case murders in Los Angeles County for over a decade. His work has been featured on Fox News, Court TV, and Dateline. For more information about Jim's work and the case for Christianity, please visit coldcasechristianity.com. Now, here's your host, J. Warner Wallace.
Well, thanks for joining us again here at Cold Case Christianity. My name is J. Warner Wallace. I want to introduce you to something called Fearless Faith Conferences. We've been doing this now, Frank Turek, Mike Adams, and I, for a number of months at local churches around America. And what we're trying to do is take the benefit of what you might know as Summit Worldview Conference. This is a great place to send your students, if you've got students between, say, 15 and 25, this is a great place to send young people to learn about the Christian worldview and all the competing worldviews that happen to be in our culture. And when students return from this 2-week immersion program, they are really transformed and very confident of the evidence in the case for Christianity and for how the Christian worldview can direct every thought about a number of different facets of culture. Now, we thought to ourselves, as 3 people who teach at Summit Worldview, Frank Turek, myself, and Mike Adams, how can we bring this to the local church in a way that's accessible, where we can kind of condense it down into about 7 hours, and we call these Fearless Faith Conferences. So what I want to do in this episode of Cold Case Christianity are show you a few clips from the Q&As at these conferences, but we're going to start with a clip that Frank produced to kind of show you why we think these conferences are important in the first place. To get more information about getting a conference like this at your local church, you can go to crossexamined.org and get more information about how to bring Fearless Faith Conferences to your local congregation. Here's the clip from Frank explaining why you should do just that.
Ladies and gentlemen, I got an email from a United States Marine not long ago. He said his daughter was the top Christian student in her high school class. She won several scholarships from Christian organizations to go to college. She went off to college, and he said 4 weeks into her first semester, I got a phone call from her. Her words devastated me. She said, "Dad, I don't believe in God anymore." Don't believe in God anymore? What happened? She ran into atheistic college professors on campus, and she didn't know how to answer them, so she's an atheist now. Don't let that happen to you or your child. Join me and J. Warner Wallace, the cold case homicide detective, along with Mike Adams, the UNC college professor, so you can learn why Christianity is true, how to answer what the atheists are saying, and how to stand strong for Christ in a culture that is bringing you an avalanche of ideas both on and off campus against the Christian faith. We're giving registration priority to high school and college students and their parents. If any space remains, then this event is going to be open to the entire congregation. Don't miss this unique opportunity to see why Christianity is true and how you can stand strong in this culture that's hostile to Christ. Here are the details.
So there you have it. This is kind of the reason why we do these conferences to begin with. And now I want to show you a clip from a Q&A. Now, we do talks at these conferences. I typically will speak about the reliability of Scripture, about the case for the resurrection. Mike Adams will give you 12 things that every student ought to do before they head off to college. And that's in 2 separate talks. And then Frank usually talks about the evidence for truth, a case for truth rather, the evidence for God's existence, and how atheistic worldviews must steal certain elements of theism in order to make their case against theism. So those talks are available either in portions or in totality. Like, you can listen to all of my talks at coldcasechristianity.com. If you start to scroll down that video page, you'll find these talks. But what I want to do in this episode is to show you clips from the Q&A, because sometimes the Q&A is the best part of these talks. So we're going to start with a short response to a question asked by somebody in the audience about the objection that is sometimes offered by atheists related to the nature of God in the Old Testament. He seems a bit angry and sadistic in some ways, in the sense that he orders the destruction of entire civilizations. How do we respond to people who find that offensive and want to know why anyone would want to worship a God who is this evil according to that definition? Here is our response at one of the Q&As at a Fearless Faith conference.
This question's for Frank. I guess anyone can chime in though. But last night you alluded to the God of the Old Testament and that he's racist and sexist and all the ists.
Right.
When you're debating that with someone who is of the more common worldview, who already, I guess, a liberal persuasion that tends to think, I guess, that all those things are already, we're all guilty of those as well. How do you, without just saying, well, you got to take it in context, or without going to a huge dissertation on the Old Testament, how it all weaves together, how do you explain that to them?
Well, first of all, you can't do it without context. But the question that you need to ask somebody is, if there is no God, why is anything in the Old Testament wrong according to your view, right? Because if there is no God, everything's a matter of opinion. Killing Canaanites or not killing Canaanites is irrelevant. There's no right or wrong. So an atheist has no grounds to complain about anything in the Bible. But if an atheist says, well, it's a problem for you, you say God is good, now that's a fair question, right? You say that's a fair question. I answer this in the book, Stealing from God. Let me just give you the 1-minute answer. So let's just take the Canaanites, for example. Does God just wake up one morning like a mafia boss and go, Canaanites, I want them dead? No, he gives reasons, right? What are the reasons the Canaanites need to be either pushed out of the land or eradicated? He says, well, they've been doing all these detestable things for years, and I've been warning them. For over 400 years, the iniquity of the Canaanites is not complete. One of the things they were doing is they were sacrificing their children on the molten hot god known as Molech. It was this metal bean that they heated up in fire, and they had this bean had its arms out, and they would put their babies on the arms of this Molech god and just basically watch the baby sizzle. And the drummers would play the drums louder so the parents in the village wouldn't hear the screams of their own kids. And God finally said, well, this needs to end. Now, on every college campus I go to, I have some atheists saying, if there is a good God, why doesn't God stop all the evil in the world? Here's an instance in the Bible where God says, enough of this, I'm going to stop it, and the atheists are complaining about it. Yeah. Right?
A really good resource for this, too, is a guy named Paul Copan,
Exactly.
who's just brilliant, out of Florida. He's a philosopher, and he's written a book called Is God a Moral Monster? He's written a sequel that just came out also. So he's kind of addressed this issue in much more depth, and it's a very accessible book. It's called Is God a Moral Monster? And he'll talk about this issue, the fact that God didn't just surprise you, but also he talks about some of the language that's used in the Old Testament that is allegorical. In other words, they're kind of ancient Near Eastern phrases that talk about wiping out everyone. In reality, they don't wipe out everyone, because you see in the Old Testament, several books later, that this people group is still in the land. They still exist. So the expression about the total annihilation of this people group is part of an ancient Near Eastern allegorical statement that other ancient documents also use. So it's a combination of several things. And I want to just say this to you. Anytime someone levels an argument against Christianity that can be leveled in 140 characters on Twitter, it's tempting to try to answer the claim in 140 characters on Twitter, and that's never the case. A murder takes place in an instant, but I have to reconstruct it in front of a jury over 8 weeks with thousands of images, why? Because this is the nature of responding to the event. And so the problem I think we have is that we want to answer that kind of objection really quickly, when in fact it's a cumulative case answer, it's much more detailed, and that's why, I'll be honest with you, I don't get involved. Even if I post something online to make people aware of it, and then an atheist comes up underneath it and makes some, one-paragraph retort, I am not going to get involved in a dialogue online. I reserve these kinds of conversations for the people who I have time with, and hopefully repeated time. So it's my brother-in-law, I'm going to see him again tomorrow. That's where I make the case. If I know I've got a jury for 8 weeks, I'll make the case. If I've got 8 minutes with you, I'm probably not going to be able to go that far with you.
By the way, one other thing about that, you might ask the person who brings up the objection, are you pro-abortion? If they say yes, you might say, why is it that when God kills people in the Old Testament, he's immoral, but when you kill people now, that's a moral right?
Now, in this next response, you've got a question that's been asked about kind of early versions of Christianity. You know, Bart Ehrman is a skeptic who's written a number of books, very popular books, in which he's argued, in one of them at least, that there are certain lost Christianities, lost versions of Christianity that existed in the first century and were part of the competing narrative of Christianity, but didn't end up making the cut, according to Bart. In other words, he would ask the question, you happen to believe a version of Christianity that just happens to be the winner of all the competing versions. It may not be true, according to this view. It just happens to be the one that wins at the end of the day. So why shouldn't we believe some of the other competing views related to the nature of Jesus or salvation or whatever it may be aren't the true realities of Christianity and just lost the contest of worldviews within the Christian worldview? That's the question here. How do we know? Well, and this is how I'm going to respond to it, and I hope this helps you. Another one of our responses from a Q&A at a Fearless Faith conference.
Hi, Detective Wallace. My name is Hayden Sparks. You referenced the 4th century church council and how a lot of people reference that. What is the most common argument that you receive for the 4th century church council, and what do you think is the strongest argument that we can present against the argument that was the council that gave us the actual gospels that we have today?
Well, typically the kind of arguments you get when it comes to councils is that Christianity is not really something that's grounded in an actual event, but is instead grounded in interpretations of those events which are given to us through the councils. So the argument would be, well, the only reason why we believe that Jesus is divine is the result of a church council at Nicaea that decides this. As if nobody ever thought that until finally this council came together and created this version of Jesus. Were there other competing ideas about Jesus? Yeah. Read Paul's letters. I mean, this is happening within the lifetime of the disciples. People are already getting errant ideas of who Jesus is. Councils typically come together in response to heresy. So the reason why we have councils is because things begin to emerge that need to be corrected. Not as though we're creating a new version of Jesus. We're trying to stop the alternate versions of Jesus, or in this case, the Council of Laodicea. Remember, by the 4th century, we're starting to see the emergence, and the early church fathers are writing about the emergence of alternate gospels that are usually coming out of North Africa. Gospel of Thomas, Gospel of Jude. These are all these other gospels that are emerging late. So at some point, when you see that some of the churches actually starting to embrace those gospels as though they're true, it's time for all of us to get together and say, time out, guys. Those late gospels do not represent the story of Jesus. And we're going to go back and make sure we realize, why do you think we picked the gospels we picked? Look at Acts chapter 1. We're replacing Judas, right? Everyone's in the upper room. And they're saying, okay, we need someone to take Judas's place. So, okay, what are the qualifications going to be for the people who will be called disciples, apostles, who will actually share the message? Who's going to take the 12th position? It's got to be somebody who saw Jesus and knew Jesus from the baptism all the way through the resurrection. In other words, we're looking for an eyewitness. If you're not an eyewitness, you can't be part of that 12. The same thing is true with the Gospels. The books we have in our Scripture, the first most important criteria is, were they written by people who were really there as eyewitnesses? So we have 4 Gospels. Now, well, how about Luke, though? Luke wasn't there as an eyewitness, and he tells you that. He was with Paul, but he had access to the eyewitnesses on a first-hand basis, and he says that in the first chapter of his book. Now, why is Mark's Gospel there? Well, because he's writing for Peter, who was an eyewitness. Why don't we include the Gospel of Thomas? Because we don't believe it's written by anybody who had any access to the events. And if you're wondering about that, look at the towns and the proper nouns that are used in the apocryphal Gospels, the Gospels that aren't in your Bible. You'll see that they had no idea, they didn't understand the geography of the area, because they're not writing it at the time. They're writing it centuries later, usually in North Africa, and they kind of give themselves away in terms of what they don't know. So this council that comes in, say Laodicea, is really not there to create something. It's there to make sure we don't distort something. So that's where I think the confusion is, that the skeptic says, well, no, these councils actually created the dogma that you all accept. When in fact, no, these councils are an effort to protect the truth because a lot of error was arising in the church. Does that make sense? I did 26 years working casework, the better half of that in the end was working cold cases. And those cases got on national media. I think I've been on Dateline more than any other detective in the country. And the people who are involved in the process, if it's not that show or other media shows, are not always believers, but they get a sense of, well, this guy can puzzle a case together. Not that I'm the only one who can do that, but you develop that skill set. If you're working in this industry, trust me, if you're out there watching this video, you know, if you're a cop, how to put a case together. So once you've demonstrated that, I think, for people, they may not agree with your conclusion, but remember, the evidence doesn't say anything. And science doesn't say anything. It's scientists and evidence evaluators that say something. So we're all looking at the same data points. We're all looking at the same evidence. I've got to draw an inference from the evidence, and I land it this way. Now, you may not agree with my inferences, but I think you can at least respect the fact that I've done the homework of presenting the evidence so an audience can assess it for themselves. So that's why I think I have supporters who don't agree with my inferences, but they respect the process. And that's one of the things I try to do uniquely in God's Crime Scene. I'm trying to give the readers not just here are the facts, but here are how detectives assemble facts to develop a case. Here are the processes, the rules that we obey, how we put a cumulative case together. How do we make cases? That's what I want you to come away with also, not just here are the facts, because you can get that out of any book. I want this to be unique in the sense that this is a book that not only gives you the data, but it instructs you on how to build a case, how to put the data together. This book, God's Crime Scene, is actually an attempt to kind of interest people in the case for God's existence using principles of cold case investigations or of homicide investigations, because I think a lot of these things are transferable. This is a discipline that's transferable. As an example, typically when you walk into a death scene, not every death scene is a crime scene, because there are 4 ways to die, and only one of those is criminal. You could die by natural causes, accidentally, by way of suicide, or by homicide. So the first goal I have to do is to determine which of these 4 is most reasonable given the evidence in the room. And sometimes one of the simplest ways to do that is to take an approach that it's a little game I call inside or outside the room. Because if you can explain all the evidence inside the room by staying inside the room, there's a good chance this is not a homicide. For example, if I've got an injury, a gunshot injury, and there's a pistol in the room, but the doors are all locked and there's no evidence of an intruder, and all the fingerprints in the room come back to the victim, and it's even the victim's gun registered to him, well, I can explain everything in the room by staying inside the room. That's going to be a suicide. And it could look kind of crazy, but it's still going to be a suicide, regardless of how it looks, because there's no evidence that I have to explain by going outside the room. If, on the other hand, I've got something in the room that I can't explain by staying in the room, I have to go outside for an explanation. Maybe that gun is not registered to him, and there's unknown fingerprints on the gun, or there's bloody footprints leading out of the house. Well, now I've got to go out of the room to get an explanation for what's inside the room. Now I've got to consider the real plausibility of an intruder. That changes everything. I thought, well, could we take the same approach and apply it not just to a death scene, but apply it to the entire known natural universe and ask this question: can we explain everything inside the universe by staying inside the room? If we can, the natural is sufficient. There's no reason to think we have an intruder. On the other hand, if we have to go outside the natural universe to explain the stuff that we see inside the room of the natural universe, that changes everything, because now we've got good reason to believe we've got an intruder. Of course, if we had that kind of an intruder, we'd have to consider the kind of cosmic nature of this, the divine nature of this kind of an intruder, at least the supernatural quality or nature of this kind of an intruder. And that's really the premise of God's Crime Scene. We're going to examine 8 pieces of evidence in the universe and ask the question, can we explain these things and account for these things by staying inside the room? Now, in this next clip, we get a chance to respond to how do you talk about God, talk about Jesus, share Jesus with your friends if you've got friends who don't seem to be interested at all in Jesus, or maybe even are aggressively against what you have to say. Should we treat different kinds of people we encounter differently based on their level of interest? This is the nature of this kind of question as you're going to hear it here. And I actually offer a response, all of us do, but I offer a response that comes directly out of my book, which is coming up next year, called Forensic Faith, which looks at 4 attributes of detective work and applies them to the Christian worldview to help you accept your duty as a case-making Christian, and then prepares you with a skill set so you can become a good Christian case maker. And in one of these sections, I talk about the importance of jury selection. Well, that's what we're going to talk about in this answer. And you'll see, I haven't even, this is an older conference, and you will see I haven't developed the graphics that are going to be in the book. I use those now, but back in these days when I would answer this question, I'd find myself drawing on the screen, and you'll see some of that. But I think it'll suffice to help you see how we approach different kinds of people we might encounter before we begin to share what we believe as Christians. This, again, is from a Fearless Faith Q&A.
Yes, sir. What's your name?
Sam.
Hey, Sam.
My question was, when you come across people who you need to share this information with, people who need to know this, how do you discern between people that you should share this information with and casting pearls before swine? Like hard-hearted people who we have the commandment not to cast pearls before swine. How do we tell the difference between those people and the people who need to hear this, who will receive it?
I'll make it fast, I promise. He's come over here and tell me, Jim,
No,
make it fast.
do it. He'll put it on a screen. Can we
Yes,
bring the
I'll
screen
go back to my PowerPoint for a second, folks. It's going to be a black screen. Okay, I'm going to draw this on here. I hope it'll show. There it is. It's in red. Can you see it?
There you go.
Can you see it now? It's not very thick. Is it? I'll try and make it thicker. Now you're going to ask me to do things I'm not quite sure I can even do. Let's see. Hang on one second. I'll make it yellow. Is that better in yellow? Okay,
it's
good.
fine. They can see it.
So here's the spectrum when we pick a jury. This is the spectrum of people we pick in a jury. All kinds of folks get called in for jury duty. We put them on a panel. They're divided into 2 broad categories. You have people in this category and people in this category. These are people on this side are people who are pro-prosecution. They just love prosecutors and cops. They pretty much believe anything you say. But they like cops. On this side, you have people who are pro-defense. This is a D. This is a P. Sorry. Can you see that? Okay, I'm up with my fingers. Okay, so there's a pro-prosecution folks and there are pro-defense folks. So these 2 groups are broken in half. Okay, so we have group 1, group 2, group 3, and group 4. Group 4. Got it? Yeah. These folks in group 1 are so pro-prosecution that they believe anything cops say. This is an exclamation point. And you can see that they are just totally pro-prosecution. In group 2, they're pro-prosecution, but they're open. They'll do the right thing. If you don't have the evidence, they'll put a question mark there. And then you have group 3 people who are pro-defense, but they're open. They'll do the right thing. So they got a question mark also. And then you have people in group 4 who are so pro-defense, they never trust anything any cop ever says. Forget it. You're out of here. Do you see the 4 groups?
Yes.
When we pick a jury, we're trying to get rid of groups 1 and 4. The prosecutor wants to get everyone in group 4 out of it because they'll hang your jury. The defense attorney wants to get everyone in group 1 out of it because they'll convict your guy. Got it? Right. So we're looking for people in groups 2 and 3. Now, I'm telling you this because this really relates to our evangelism also. Because it turns out that the people in our world are broken into 2 groups we can preach the gospel to. There are people we can talk the truth about. In the first group, this is now a B. If you can see it's a B. These are believers. And these are unbelievers. Here's a U. In group 1, we've got people who are such strong believers, you could get the body of Jesus and drag it in front of the bones of Jesus. They would say, I don't care. I'm still in. I don't care what you show me evidentially. I will never change my mind. I am a Christian. Great. They're in group 1. Group 2 are Christians who are starting to have doubts. Group 3 are atheists that are starting to have doubts. And group 4 are atheists that I don't care what you say, they don't want to hear you. So how do I deal with these groups? Clearly, the groups in 2 and 3, again, are the sweet spot. But I actually want to share the truth with group 1. Because they don't even think you need to have any evidence for what you believe. But guess what? They're raising kids in their family, and they're in group 2. And you need to be ready to help the people in group 2 that are in your family. You might think, well, I don't need that. They need it. And they don't even want our books. You can buy our books. I hope you do buy our books. We'll have to sign our books. But guess what? You can't give our books to your kids. They're not going to read them. They don't want to hear from us. The first apologist your kids want to hear from is you. We don't need another $1 million apologist. We need $1 million $1 apologists. Got it? So you need to be doing that if you're in group 1. But of course I'm interested in group 2 and 3. Group 4 is where my dad is. And that's where I was for 35 years. So what do you do with folks in group 4? Well, you do the same thing that Frank talked about already. This is the group you pray for and you model Christ to. Because at some point, until God calls them into group 3, you won't reach them, and it'll feel like it's a failure. But trust me, I was hearing you when I was in group 4 before God pulled me into group 3, and I remembered everything you said once I was in group 3. So it's worth your time. But remember that that's the group that right now, if they're in their room, they're live tweeting what a jerk I am. They're adamantly against us. And they're blogging against us and writing against. They hate us. So we model for that. Now, I just sent a group of students to Berkeley, right? We take students to Berkeley to expose them to atheism, okay? And I teach them this stuff, and when they go, I saw they sent me pictures from Berkeley. The students are wearing shirts that said, I showed you these, I'm praying for group 4. So you'd be praying for group 4, okay?
Yeah. So. And Sam, the short way to find out where people are is to ask them the question, if Christianity were true, would you become a Christian? See how they react to that. If somebody goes, well, sure, and it seems they're sincere, they're in group 3 probably, right? If somebody says no or says, yeah, but you couldn't do that, because I get that a lot. If I could show you it was true, would you believe it? Yeah, but you couldn't do that, they're still in group 4.
Well, I hope that gives you an example of some of the cross-section of questions that are asked and the kinds of topics we even cover at these Fearless Faith conferences. If you're interested in bringing us out to your church to do a 7-hour seminar covering the evidence for Christianity and equipping your people, your church family, to be able to make the case for what they believe, please visit crossexamined.org, and you'll see the link there to contact us to set up your own Fearless Faith conference. Until next week, I'll see you right here at Cold Case Christianity.
Thanks for joining us at the Cold Case Christianity broadcast. If you're interested in more information about this week's topic, please visit coldcasechristianity.com. For a thorough investigation of the reliability of the New Testament Gospels and the case for Christianity, be sure to purchase Cold Case Christianity. A homicide detective investigates the claims of the Gospels. It's available wherever books are sold.